something happens.
I did make a coho.
Awesome.
Did you receive it? Did you receive my blessing of being
Yeah,
coho?
let me look. We'll take care of it.
Okay. All right. Well, it says that we are live, so let's go forward. Hello, everyone. I am KatmanU, psychic empath and psychic wrangler. And before we see who I've wrangled in today's show, let me welcome you to Third Eye Salon, where in each and every week we look between the veils of reality. And today, Jack is back. That's the name of the show. Is Jack is back. And we're taking a deep dive into cryptids and their connections to ancient aliens and alternate dimensions. So we're so excited to have Jack Cary back on the show, but we only have him for an hour. Tragedy. He's got some fun things going on in his house at the top of the hour. So we're going to do our intros here quickly so that we can optimize our time. So I will now toss the mic lovingly over to Miss Lynda.
Okay. Hey, everybody, you know the drill. Be nice or get out. Look at the links down below. And, you know, if you want to buy us a cup of coffee, love you. If you can't, share us anyway. You know, we need it. You need it. Somebody needs it. And with that, Jack, as you have your wonderful cup of coffee yourself, good morning.
I am. Good morning, guys. How are you?
We're doing awesome.
Fantastic being here.
And so let's also say hello to Mr. Jason. Jason, how you doing, buddy?
Doing good. Glad to be back for part 2.
Right?
Good
Part
deal.
1 was so good, and I was just hyped all week for this show. So I'm going to quickly go through Jack's bio. So Jack Cary is an investigative author with over 30 years as a field investigator into paranormal phenomenon, cryptozoology, and ancient unsolved mysteries. He has appeared on numerous docuseries discussing these subjects. He is the author of American Sorcererer, Bigfoot Unleashed, Paranormal Planet, and the Enoch Code. Jack is also a regular contributor to on Gaia TV for the Ancient Civilization series, which is actually where I met him. And so give us a thumbs up, especially if you're excited to learn not just about the Sasquatch, but centaurs, goatmen, dogmen, and dogwomen, and so much more. We just want to dive right into it. And so also to let you know, last week we had some little threads I wanted to connect about the Anunnaki and the reptilian race and what's happening on the planet. We did a little pre-show chat about that, so I will be sharing that later at another time, but that will be available for people. But let us go and talk about, we'll start off with Sasquatch, because Sasquatch for a lot of our community is our big brother. You know, we see Sasquatch as somebody who's an elder brother who's sort of wiser and more advanced in many psychic and paranormal ways than we would be. And I'm wondering, in your nuts and bolts research of Sasquatch, how do you experience this this being, this tribe of beings?
You know, nothing has been more fascinating or more frustrating in all of my years of paranormal investigation than have been my cryptozoology investigations into the Sasquatch / Bigfoot mystery. And that led me into writing Bigfoot Unleashed. The current state of the Bigfoot mystery is that there's quite a bit of encrusted dogma, I would say now, that sort of around the mystery of Bigfoot. There's a lot of preconceived and staunchly defended notions of what these creatures are that are largely based on feelings and not a lot of actual evidence. And a lot of hope, you know, there's a lot of hope too. And I think the truth really is kind of somewhere in between. My experience with the species is very similar to many others in that we came across some that were very aggressive. We've come across some that seemed extremely benign. And we've come across some that seemed perfectly indifferent as to our presence or wants or, you know, goals or anything like that. And so I think that there's sort of a wide spectrum to the species, very much like humans, in that there's some of them that are naturally more aggressive and kind of have a darker side to them. Some of them are more benevolent and willing and able to help humans sometimes. You know, you hear some of those stories. And some of them seem to be just completely indifferent. You know, they're on their way somewhere and they could just care less one way or another about a human. They're not going to aggressively go towards them, and they're not really cared about fleeing them so much. They're just kind of going about their business, you know. So it's interesting. This species is, you know, the one thing I'm absolutely certain of is that I think the vast majority of their existence is in the real here and now world. There's a lot of theory out there about them being interdimensional in nature. That has not been my field experience 30 years. That does not, however, discount a wide array of paranormal activity associated with the phenomenon, and which I have fully chronicled in my book. And that's really kind of the purpose of my book, was talking about all of the things that most Bigfoot investigators are uncomfortable talking about. Things like in 20% of all very credible Bigfoot sightings, a UFO is also seen at the same time. The fact that in a big percentage of alien abductee accounts in which the abductees are drawn out to forested areas, these creatures are seen in the presence of gray aliens. I mean, this is just where the evidence leads, and it makes a lot of people uncomfortable, because here it is, they're already studying a pursuit most of their family and friends think them nuts for, and then you one-up them with the fact that all of this other paranormal phenomenon appears to have a relationship to the species, and it's just a bridge too far for a lot of people. But that is, in fact, where the evidence leads. And in fact, one of the very first UFO cases ever investigated, I should say the very first, by Project Blue Book, was the Presque Isle incident, in which a Bigfoot and a UFO were both seen simultaneously by the eyewitnesses. 1967. Something like that, yeah. Insane. So, so there is, and me, myself, I'll tell you of this firsthand experience. So me and my partner, JC Johnson, who was a world famous cryptozoologist, passed away suddenly and very early on in life. He was only 49 at the time, got double pneumonia, and ended up passing away prematurely. Had so much more to give, and he was the most talented cryptozoologist I think anybody ever had the privilege to work with, and I'm truly privileged in that sense. And he taught me a lot about the species. But we're on an expedition, and we're in the Chusca Mountains in northern New Mexico. And we have 2 Navajo guides, and we're on horseback, because in these areas there are no roads. You know, you can do a trail. I mean, there's trails, but you're going to take the hardest, you know, the biggest 4x4 truck you can imagine, and you're going to have to creep and crawl. So we just take horseback because it's easier to get into these areas. Well, a track line had been reported. Somebody had spotted some tracks that was back there hunting. So we went in to investigate. And what we came across was a track line of 19-inch footprints that are perfectly, I mean, amazing. You can even see the toes digging in, right? And the stride between footprints was about 6 feet. And that was it, just walking through the field. He was just strolling with a 6-foot stride and 19-inch prints. And you're putting this thing at about 12 feet tall. That's a big creature, and over 1,000 pounds. Our guide said this thing had to weigh over 1,000 pounds to put that kind of indention into that ground. Well, the topography never changes, but right there in the middle of the field, the tracks just stopped. And they shouldn't have. There's no reason. And only one of two things could have occurred at that moment in time. And we're not the first people that have been out investigating Bigfoot and have come across these disappearing track lines. Well, JC looks down and starts shaking his head in disbelief. And I looked up and started shaking my head in disbelief, because about halfway through this track line, the stride of the creature went from 6 feet to 10 feet in one single stride, and it dug deep. And what that meant to me and to the guides was that this thing got spooked. And then you have to ask yourself, what's going to spook a 12-foot tall, 1,000-pound bipedal creature that is by all means the apex predator of the North American forest in its own habitat? What's going to spook an animal like that? I mean, we have accounts of them scared grizzly bears take off like that when they come across these creatures, right? I mean, what? And it suddenly occurred to me that whatever had spooked this thing and caused it to take off running had come from the sky. And our DNA and the DNA of over 100 other samples sent in from around the country to be examined in the Sasquatch Genome Project told us that the mother's lineage, the mitochondrial lineage, is in fact Homo sapien. It is modern human. This occurred in over 100 samples. The Y paternal DNA came back unknown, but closely resembling primate. Right? So I firmly believe, well, I think that there is a good reason to believe that since human beings are being abducted for their DNA, for whatever reason, we can speculate and have, these creatures too may in fact be abductees. It could be that their DNA is so amazing that they too are being studied. And the very first account you have of Bigfoot or Sasquatch is in the Sumerian tablets. It goes back that old. Yes, a creature, and his name is Enki-Du. Enki being the name of one of the two princes in the Anunnaki lineage, right? Well, Enki-Du is in the Epic of Gilgamesh, and Enki-Du is sent to destroy Gilgamesh, but it's a creature, a tall bipedal man covered in long red hair with super strength, a wild man of the woods. And eventually he and Gilgamesh become friends and they go on a series of adventures together, right? The same thing's told in the story of Jacob and Esau in the Bible, right? You look at the birth of Jacob. Jacob comes out clutching Esau's leg, and Esau is covered in long red hair. And he becomes a wild man of the woods. And his dad is proud of him because he can catch wild game on foot, bring it back to him, And he pats him on the head. He's like, good boy, and all this. Well, Jacob comes out normal, just like us. And he goes on to form the very first tent-dwelling nation. And Esau goes off to the wilderness to found his people and nation, which are now the hidden people of the forest that we call Bigfoot and Sasquatch. And remember, in the biblical tale, he trades his birthright for a bowl of soup. Esau does. Jacob tricks him. And he says, I will trade you your birthright to, your inheritance for this bowl of soup. And Esau's so simple-minded and so wild and part of not human that he ends up accepting the offer and ends up becoming separated from humanity forever. That is the biblical story of Bigfoot. And it goes all the way back to the story of Gilgamesh in the Sumerian tablets.
Wonder what was in the bowl of soup that was so enticing.
I know, right? It gives a full description. It was just because he was hungry.
Oh, really? All right.
Yeah.
Well, but also those things where it's like, that's the biblical version of it, which is, like coded and simplified. And I'm like,
Sure.
if there was other things that were going on. We've got some questions from our wonderful, amazing audience today, but I wanted to pull back just a little bit because there are definitely people who, what would be great to have is to have someone like Sue Walker and you in conversation, because Sue Walker is somebody who's telepathic, and she communicates with there's a race called the Ponti, a very loving Zeta race called the Ponti, and she has telepathic communications with Sasquatch as well. And she's said, and I love that you're like, there's a scope, there's a range. It's not just all like, oh, Sasquatch wants to hug you. Well, that's
Right.
some. Other ones, couldn't care less, and other ones are like, I will take you down if you
Right.
invade.
Mhm.
And she says something similar where it's like there are some, in terms of this whole ability to jump dimensions, or shift into other dimensions. She's like, there are some that can't, because that's not where they're at in their evolution. There are some that can, and there's some that are really, really advanced. And there's, again, this range. It's not just black and white.
Right. And like I was discussing the DNA, like plug-in and the DNA ability, the whole point of DNA is this ability of the spirit to be able to plug into this reality matrix. It occurs to me that, and this all goes back to the fact that we did a hair morphology study on the DNA samples of the Bigfoot that we got. It was over 1,000 hair strands. I have pictures of Dr. Christopher Dyer with it in his hands inside the package that we were sending off to the lab. Like I documented all of this perfectly because I didn't want to hear anybody's crap from all of these scientists. Now, here is a well-respected field biologist we took with us to collect 2 different DNA samples separated by 80 miles of terrain within a 24-hour period, both with eyewitnesses, indigenous eyewitnesses to the DNA being left. That is as good as it gets. It is as good as it gets. Without a body, that's as good as it gets. And we collected blood, tissue, and hair off of one of the scenes, and over 1,000 strands of hair off of the other. Well, when we looked at the actual structure of the hair, the shaft, there's no medulla. So like in a human, there's a spongy center in the hair shaft, and that's called a medulla. In these creatures, that's not there. And in its place is a type of very, very highly reflective oil. It's an oily substance, right? And what we determined was that it was so reflective that when you cover yourself in it and you're sitting like in heavily bushed area, green foliage, that green light literally reflects through the fur. It is like nature's perfect camouflage. You couldn't develop a better camouflage. It literally absorbs the light around you in a way that cloaks you. They always talk about Bigfoot's ability to cloak. Here is DNA showing that ability actually evolved into the species. You see what I mean?
Oh my God.
And so it's an amazing thing. And I've got a picture of a Sasquatch from the High Falls hiking trail in South Carolina. And when you look at this being, you can see this effect in perfect display, because you can see it sitting there perfectly, and yet it has this greenish hue all to it. And when we took the few frames that it appears in and stripped away all the blue and green light, you have a perfect Sasquatch sitting there. And the facial structure from here down is archaic human, prehistoric archaic human, from the eye sockets down, from here up, coned and primate-like, a perfect chimera, which is exactly what these things are. They are a hybrid species.
All right. So I want to have Jason hop in with his questions, and then I want to have Lynda come in with questions from the audience. Since I'm just like looking at the time, so Mr. Jason, come in with any questions that you
Yeah,
have.
well, I have more of a comment, I guess, rather than a question.
Ooh, your mic is on the
Because
zipper. Your mic is on the zipper.
I'm holding it.
But
And maybe this headset. Okay. So I guess it's more of a comment because I have a guide that's a Sasquatch. I call him Harry from Harry and the Hendersons because he's red. That's what he reminds me of, right?
Right.
And from what my understanding with him is that Sasquatch are children of the earth, right? But so like if you think, hey, you said the prehistoric man or the archaic man, if like say if those cavemen types had never been genetically modified by all these other entities, like that's Sasquatch, like that's kind of the lineage. Like that's kind of the way that he's explained it to me. Excuse me. But I guess I do have a question because you've mentioned like these red fur, and that's how hairy is. He's red, but he's also explained that depending on where they're at, kind of like a bear, right? How you have different color bears in different forests, which helps blend into their environment.
Sure.
But what we haven't really talked about is, do you think that Yeti, right, the abominable snowman, how do you say that? Abominable snowman?
Abominable.
The white fur, like my understanding is it's just another version of a Sasquatch, but they're white because of the environment that they're in. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, exactly. Because one of the other species on the planet that shares that no medulla hair shaft structure is the polar bear. And it's because it can reflect the white of its surroundings and add to its camouflage. So you have a biological known example, really, of what's going on there. Interestingly enough, though, we've had white Sasquatch reported here to us in heavily forested areas that are green. And some of them that appear to sort of gray over time with age, and they just can't hide the white, the white grain, kind of like an old man with his white beard. But yeah, I firmly believe that I'm glad you bring up the abominable snowman, because this is something I like to point out to people, is the planetary wide nature of this phenomenon. You can look up like on Google, all known species that appear on every continent. And there are two. One is a type of crane. The other is the dung beetle. And here we have a primate species that appears everywhere. It appears in North America, South America, Australia, an island separated from the rest of humanity by how many millions of years, and by white people for 50,000 up until the time of Captain Cook. All through Europe, you have these tales of wild men. In Russia, you have the Almasti, you have the Yeti. In China, you have the Yeren. It goes on and on. Australia, the Yowie. So how do we explain one species that has the ability to inhabit all these continents different than the rest of biology, known biology on this planet? And I think the answer to that is the extraterrestrial connection that this species has. And the fact that it goes back to ancient Sumerian times, And how old are those tablets? Boy, the ones we know about 12,000 years old, We don't know if those are copied from a prior civilization even, there's no telling. So, but we know that these creatures existed in the ancient past, and we have indigenous oral histories here in North America that are so prevalent that there's over 300 names for a species that our scientists say can't exist.
It doesn't say that they don't exist. Yeah.
Right.
Well, talking about proof, let's toss the mic over to Lynda, because she had some great questions from our audience.
Okay, so one of the big questions, and it's mostly for me, you've mentioned of course, inquiring minds want to know. You mentioned the footprints, you mentioned the DNA. Is that featured pictures of the footprints anywhere in your books or somewhere else that
Yes,
people
in
can
fact,
look?
all of the pictures are in my book, Bigfoot Unleashed. And if you get the Kindle version And I remind everybody, Kindle's a free app. You can download it to anything. And if you get the Kindle version, it's only $5. It has all color photographs of all this evidence I'm talking about. Color photographs. And that's why I love Kindle. People are like, I want the paper copy. Well, that's great. But the paper copy has black and white photos. And when you're presenting forensic evidence, it sure is nice to see the color in the photos. You know what I mean?
And I believe you can zoom in a little bit easier on those.
You can see, you know, even on the footprints, the epidermal ridges in the sand that the thing left. You can't fake that kind of stuff.
Fabulous.
You know, so
yeah, that was my biggie. Is like, I'm always, where is it? Where can I go look at it? So
no, I'm big on not just telling people about evidence. I'm big on actually having the evidence to show them. And so you will find the evidence chronicled in my books. The videos that I produce are absolute capsules of all of the best available evidence for any particular phenomenon that video may be about. And I go to great pains to collect all of the best credible evidence and present it in a logical, linear form. And that's what I've done in my books too.
I just as you were talking about the whole experience of the following the footprints going into nothing and having that last set kind of deeper, one of the things that came to my mind was, as I was watching it, and instinctually it was, we were the ones that spooked him, and that the deep engravement would happen with jumping or being lifted up, and perhaps the UFO is taking him away. Just a thought, just a different thought. Who knows?
Yeah.
It'd be cool to remote view that, like that instance.
Well, that was kind of, it was like, I was kind of going through this and it was like, oh, that's what I saw. So just for what it's worth, that's what was going through. Evolution of Sasquatch, how does that play with humans side by side?
Yeah, well, from what we can tell, because of the story of Enkidu, and knowing that story exists within tablets talking about the DNA manipulation of the human species with a hominid species that they had already discovered here on the planet, we may, in that hominid species, find the common origin between us being altered by the Anunnaki and the lineage of modern day Bigfoot and Sasquatch may actually go back to the same pre-primate creature, which we don't have a record of. And I have to remind people of that. For every single DNA sample that you collect of anything, you send that into a laboratory. The laboratory will analyze it, get the signature, and then the signature is compared against what they call the World Genetic Bank. So the World Genetic Bank holds the key to public acceptance of the Sasquatch creature. And what do they need in order to get a deposit positively identified in the World Genetic Bank? You have to have a body. They will not accept anything else. We have tried it so many different ways and so many different times. That is the big obstacle. And until you can overcome that obstacle and get, like Dr. Dishotel at New York University, send him a sample of Sasquatch, which he's examined hundreds of times, and have him send that off, and it comes back positive from the World Genetic Bank, Sasquatch, he'll announce it to the world. But until that happens, there's not one of these credentialed scientists who are going to stick their neck out. Not one. So, and most of them suspect, and I think it haunts them, that they're real. I think it haunts them.
I feel like I remember reading a story or seeing a video years ago of someone had a body, but it was like a child Sasquatch, and they had it frozen. It was in a block of ice, and they would, not like a Barnum and Bailey type thing, but they would display it. I feel like I've seen pictures of it.
Yeah, the Minnesota Iceman was what he was known as, the Minnesota Iceman. And it appears when you do the investigation that the Minnesota Iceman was actually what they call a rock ape that came from Vietnam. And rock apes were experienced by our Marines in Vietnam, and they were Vietnamese Bigfoot who picked up rocks and threw them at our Marines. And there's a fully chronicled battle between our Marines and a big group of these things that were chunking rocks at them. So this guy, the guy who ends up owning it in Minnesota, and my partner, JC Johnson, knew the inside story. He knew the man, he knew how all of this happened. He had a buddy that was a helicopter pilot in Vietnam who had a body, and he brought that body back from Vietnam with him, sold it to this guy who then encased it in a big block of ice and began to sell tickets to it. The interesting thing is that Ivan T. Sanderson, the famous intelligence agent / turned cryptozoologist, went to the actual Minnesota Iceman exhibit, and there was a crack in the ice. And he talks about in his writings how he and another famous Bigfoot researcher at the time put their noses down to it, and they could smell the smell of rotting flesh, that it was a real body. And it was at that stage that all of a sudden the Minnesota Iceman goes missing, just goes missing. And word has it that the owner was really, really worried that he was going to get into real federal trouble by having this body. And so he ended up making it disappear.
I'm going to change back to giant red-haired Sasquatch.
Yes.
And
Red hair is important.
Equate that to the Hickory Apaches, who have a story about 10-foot red hair giants that would eat everybody.
Yeah, not only them, but I prefer even the Paiute edition, which is even more detailed, I think, than the Apache. But Lovelock Cave, Lovelock Cave is the famous cave where they said to have ran them all in there and then set a fire and burn them all alive. The ones that ran out got cut down immediately, and that was supposed to be the last bastion of these things in North America. But these red-haired giants apparently span the entire continent at one point, and the Paiute also have a very interesting tale, which I previously discussed, about their battle with the red-haired giants, in which they ended up collecting some of the red hair and fashioning what they called mourning dresses out of them for the warriors that were slain in battle. And apparently at least one of those dresses still exists in possession of a woman whose name is Sarah Winnemucca. I don't know if she's still alive, and maybe it's in the possession of her family now, but she's written extensively about that entire experience of the tribe.
Like the giants and Sasquatch, those are two different beings. It's like the giants would be the ones that are the offspring of the humans and the Anunnaki.
Yeah, we believe that to be the case. I don't think that the red-haired giants that were cut down by the Paiute and by the Hickory were Bigfoot. In fact, Bigfoot is always seen by these indigenous tribes as being the older big brother. They're seen as being another Native American tribe, actually. Right. I published this article in my book, the earliest known article on Bigfoot in North America. It is fascinating. Comes out of this California newspaper, and it talks about how it doesn't even say Bigfoot. They didn't have a word for it. It says big hairy Indians inhabit the forest. That's what the headline says. And it talks about them talking to the local natives, and the natives explaining all of this information to them, that this was another indigenous tribe. They saw them as a tribe of people, and that they had all of these crazy abilities, like the ability of ventriloquism. When I read ventriloquism, I nearly fell out of my seat, because we have account after account after account of people coming across these creatures and their ability to mimic human speech. They can mimic any bird. They can throw their voices. They can literally pitch their voices like a ventriloquist does. And here is one of the very first newspaper articles ever. talking about that ability. It's fascinating.
It is utterly fascinating. I want to flip into the whole, because you said the word chimera earlier. And so I want, if you would talk to us about cryptids, moving into the wider realm again, because I think of Sasquatch as elder brother, not a cryptid, but if we move into the idea of beings that were genetically created versus beings that are bleed through into other dimensions, there's something,
Sure.
there's two other things going on according to your research. I'm wondering if you kind of
Yes.
give us the overview of that, and then we can start to pull it apart.
Sure. Yeah. And this is kind of a very important point. So in my book, Paranormal Planet, I theorized what I call the unified field theory of paranormal activity. And after all of those years of field investigations, it became apparent to me that the vast majority of paranormal activity could be traced back to what I thought was going to be a singular source. It ended up being a dual source. One of those sources is interdimensional in nature. The other source is Earth's interaction with what I call a type 3 alien civilization. There are two separate things occurring here. The Earth has a very unique crystalline structure to it. And at the same time, we have various surface areas, geographic areas, where a wide array of paranormal activity all takes place within a relatively small geographic area. The San Luis Valley of South Central Colorado being one of the primary spots, place I did investigations for 2 decades. So what you have in each one of these areas with this wide array of paranormal stuff all occurring, and I'm talking about one day you have a UFO sighting reported to you, the next day somebody has a direct, like, face-to-face encounter with a Sasquatch, the next day somebody has a poltergeist experience, the next day somebody, sees a shapeshifter shift into an animal and run away, all within a couple of miles of one another.
Wow.
And they're all sincere. And you're thinking, what in the hell is going on here? What in the hell is going on here? And then one day you get a call from a guy, and he's positioned out in a flat area of the valley, which, by the way, is the longest and widest alpine valley in the world. It's gigantic. It's like, I don't know, 70 miles long, 50 miles wide. So you're talking about a big valley surrounded by 14,000-foot mountain peaks. This guy's out in the middle. He's describing a scene where all of a sudden it begins to shimmer in front of him. Then a scene begins to manifest of cowboys being chased by a group of Indians, like a scene from a movie. These things are shooting back and everything, and he's like, it's in full high def. And all of a sudden it shimmers again, and it's gone, like a mirage, right? So what's happening here? I spent years trying to figure this out. And there are various places like this identified around the United States, like the Bridgewater Triangle on the East Coast. You have Mount Shasta as one of these areas. Like I said, you have Colorado. There's a place in Nevada. This exists around the world. There's various areas, and we call these vortex areas, right? So what commonality do they all have? Vast amounts of quartz crystal deposits right underneath. Vast amounts. And I'm a big science fan, a big, aficionado of all things having to do with science. And I'm watching a documentary one day, and there's a scientist on there, and he built something called a Mach effect thruster, right? Seems like completely unrelated. I'm like, that's interesting. And I'm watching this thing, and this scientist figured out that mass, as it's traveling through space, fluctuates. And when it fluctuates, it, puts off tiny amounts of energy. And if you're smart enough, clever enough, you can harness that tiny amount of energy in each one of those fluctuations and create kind of a 0-point energy. And he did this, and he created an engine called a Mach effect thruster. It really works. It's going to be the future maybe of space travel, right? So it's fascinating. It's also called the Woodward effect for the students out there looking this up. So it suddenly occurred to me, this is exactly what we have occurring on the planet. The Earth is a body of mass. It's traveling through space. There's minute fluctuations. When those minute fluctuations occur, it pushes these vast quartz crystal deposits together, compresses them to the point where they ionize. When they ionize, they create electromagnetic fields that are strong enough to rip or tear the membrane, which our physicists say is an electromagnetic membrane, between this dimension and another, enough that there's momentary interaction that takes place, and we call that paranormal. That's the function, the mechanism by which the interdimensional activity is taking place. It's a natural mechanism. It's like we live on a planet with interdimensional doorways that just open spontaneously from time to time. And you have these areas where these doorways are, where you're getting this interdimensional activity, and one guy has one thing happen, another guy has another thing happen, another guy has another thing happen, and it's all interdimensional in nature, coming from the fact that these fields are ripping a hole in between two different realities. So that is one, and I bring that up because this is leading us into the Dogman cryptid, something I really want to talk about during this hour, because this is a perfect example of the in-between, right? Here you have a creature that has an ancient oral history, indigenous history. It has an ever-increasing body of modern day credible eyewitnesses, and it has physical trace evidence being left at the scene in the form of both the DNA and footprints. Where have we heard that before? The Bigfoot phenomenon, right? Mm-hmm. Almost identical. If you erase the head off the creature, all of those things are identical. That's fascinating, right? How is that possible that we have two bipedal cryptid animals roaming this planet that are hominid in nature, both apparently going against natural biological processes as we understand them to be? There is no natural biological processes by which a bipedal hominid creature should develop a canine head. It just should not ever occur. It's a primate thing, right? So this takes us, and I know this is weird, but it takes us right up to modern day, here and now, Pentagon ongoing OSAP program occurring as we're talking, studying the paranormal aspects of the UFO phenomenon. Now, bear with me. One of the principal incidents of what they call the hitchhiker effect. Okay, so the Pentagon had a UFO program, and they're studying the UFOs, which everybody knows about. Underneath that, running parallel, was another program called OSAP, which did nothing but study the paranormal aspects of the UFO phenomenon. Nothing but the paranormal. This has now all been published in a book called Skinwalkers at the Pentagon. Anybody can check this out. There's your evidence right there. This entire account I'm about to tell you is all chronicled within this book by Dr. Colm Kelleher, the chief scientist of the program. So they began to notice that all of the people that were studying UFOs in the Pentagon's UFO program began to go home and experience a wide array of paranormal activity, poltergeist activity. They're studying the UFO, they go home, and all of a sudden shit's moving across the house, throwing. All of a sudden there's stuff manifesting out of, like metal object, manifest out of thin air, gone again, right? Now, this apparently worked like a virus. So For instance, the primary guy I'm going to talk about here is a CIA agent who was the highest ranking intelligence officer involved at the time. He goes by they identify him simply by the name Axelrod. Mr. Axelrod, involved with the ATIP program, goes home one day and he takes with him what they call now the hitchhiker effect. All of a sudden, paranormal stuff starts happening in his house. Then his children began to experience it. Then his children's friends, then the neighbors, then the neighbors' friends, then the neighbors' friends' parents. And this thing began to spread out like a paranormal virus. Think about that, right? One night, Mr. Axelrod's wife goes to the kitchen window, 10:45 at night, it's on a Sunday, and she's getting a glass of water, and she looks out the window, and right across the property, standing next to a tree, is a Dogman. Upright, 12-foot tall, humanoid, dog-headed creature, staring right at her with glowing yellow eyes. Petrified, but she also thinks she got to be imagining. She's going crazy, right? She doesn't say anything. She tells nobody. The following Wednesday, 10:45 a.m. in the morning, the kids are in the game room watching TV. They see some movement. They look up through the window, and there is that Dogman staring dead at them through the window. They get up. It takes off. They run over to the window. They describe it actually seeing it kick up leaves as it ran off. This was a physical being. This cryptid encounter has now been positively identified by the Pentagon's OSAP program as being part of the overall hitchhiker effect. Right? Now, this is where things get really interesting. Let's go to ground zero for modern day Dogman sightings, Bray Road, the Beast of Bray Road, chronicled by, what is her name? Lynda Godfrey, the renowned researcher. She was a journalist, a newspaper reporter. And here is where all the modern day Dogman sightings begin, right? The Beast of Bray Road, this big black Dogman, and it's seen from the 1960s up to present day. Well, there's a farmer who owns all the land adjacent to Bray Road, and he gets interested in it. And he's seen the creature a couple of times off in the distance, right? So he decides to install cameras on his property. Now, all of this is in a documentary dealing with the subject that so anybody can see this out there. He installs these cameras. What does he capture on his cameras? Non-stop UFO activity. Non-stop. Along with that UFO activity, he comes across canine prints that have 5 toes but 7 pads. Something that doesn't exist in nature, in which we have high definition photographs of now. He kills a deer. He decides to bait the camera, kills a deer, puts the deer in front of the camera in hopes of getting a picture of the beast, right? Instead, a fog forms in the middle of the field, moves over the carcass of the deer, and when the fog dissipates, the carcass is gone. That's what he captures on camera. Now, fast forward to Lynda Godfrey, the newspaper reporter and author who wrote the books about all of this, gets a phone call one day. And who's on the other end of the line? A CIA remote viewer who proved to her with his credentials that he was who he said he was. And she writes all about this. And he tells her that Dogmen were targeted by a group of remote viewers in the CIA. Interesting, huh? Since we have the Pentagon reporting, right? And what did they say? They said that this is a species of creature created by an extraterrestrial intelligence, that they are inhabiting down in these deep crevices of the earth, that they wear some sort of biological armor, which is why our eyewitnesses who have shot them at close range with high caliber weapons report no effect. Reports that they have a translucence to their fur, which allows them to basically blend into different backgrounds, and that they have a technology which allows them to basically dematerialize and rematerialize. It's kind of like Star Trek. They can literally go from one spot to another spot on the planet almost instantaneously using this technology. They didn't know anything other than they appeared to be waiting for something. He couldn't figure anything other than that out. He reported this all to her, and she wrote it in her book. And I know Lynda Godfrey. I've been on a few radio interviews with Lynda talking about the Dogman phenomenon, and I've investigated Dogman cases. So one of those is called the Lakewood Lichen case. If people want to look that case up, it's probably the most famous Dogman case I investigated, but it was fascinating, and it happened in Denver. Lakewood. Happened in Lakewood. So yeah, I know. Yeah.
Wow.
So yeah, how do we account for that, right? So here is what most people in the cryptid community would call cryptid number 2 on the radar. Dogman today it's right under Bigfoot as far as popularity and ongoing sightings, interactions, etc. Same thing like Bigfoot, we have it occurring in every continent. Every continent. And because I believe an ET relationship has been firmly established between the two, that when I get a Dogman sighting encounter, I am now seeing that, like somebody calls in and says, I had a Dogman encounter. To me, that is now a signpost of alien or UFO activity. They're that interrelated.
And real quick, are there dog women? I think
You
we talked
know,
about that last week.
there apparently are, because if you watch one of my videos, which is called Dogman, the Ultimate Nightmare, on my channel, at the very end of it, you're going to see a sequence of a German documentary, which was produced and only filmed in Germany, nowhere else. In this documentary, there is actual footage of what appears to be a female dog man body that they came across during World War II, some of their soldiers, and actually filmed it laying on the ground in a state of rigor mortis. And yes, you can tell it's female.
Okay, we have got 8 precious minutes with you left. I'll toss the mic over to Jason, and we'll toss the mic over to Lynda.
2 quick questions. One of them's just kind of funny because of my sense of humor. So the female Dogman, are we talking about like 6 sets of teats? You know, like
No, actually just normal 2, like a normal human.
And
Very
then,
interesting.
do we think that the legend of werewolves could have something to do with Dogman sightings?
I do not. I think that they are 2 separate things. And, you know, we'll have to get back into that again. But I've got a number of cases which kind of point to an ancient European DNA blood lineage where this genetic trait apparently appears every so often. It's almost like a recessed gene that only pops out every so often. And there was an actual case that occurred, and don't laugh, I know it's funny, but it occurred in New London, Ohio, the werewolves of London, right? Of a European immigrant that actually ended up settling there. And this European immigrant apparently was the real deal. He was a real werewolf. And it's a fascinating case.
And this is different than the people that we have currently that have the excess hair growth.
Yeah, hypertrichosis.
Yeah.
No, that's just a normal human malfunction. No, he shifted into something that was not human. And the eyewitnesses are unimpeachable. So That's actually on my channel too. It's called The Werewolf of New London. If you watch that, you'll see all of the evidence. Man, it is a hair-raising case. It really is, especially at the
Irony.
end where the guy dies. He dies, and they're able to find the shed where he lived in, and wait till you see what they found in that shed.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
We'll share that in the Facebook group. We'll find that and we'll put that in our Facebook group.
Yeah, that's the real paranormal.
Oh my
It's my
God.
world.
Miss Lynda?
When I think about the Dogman, it's so accepted in Native American culture and being skinwalkers. It's just
Right.
part of the culture. And they are very afraid of Dogman.
Very,
Very
very.
afraid.
You don't bring up the subject to Navajo that you aren't intimately acquainted with, or you
No way.
ejected immediately.
It's not, it's not discussed
Yeah, it is
Um,
not.
for fear that it will bring their presence.
We'll bring them around. Yep,
Yeah.
absolutely. So
Yeah.
they're
But
well
Dogman
That's
and
just-
skinwalkers are two different things, though.
Well, I think the two have become intertwined in their lore, but they have a tradition. The Navajo have a tradition of certain witches being able to take on the
Mhm.
ability of shifting into a canine, a fully headed canine
Oh.
humanoid species.
Oh.
But
I do
yeah.
I've got pictures. If you look at the landing page of my website, you'll see a picture, one of the only known, truly verified pictures of a skinwalker witch from the early 1800s. There are only a couple known photographs, and I have them both. The other is of one of them using one of their camouflage techniques. And I've often thought that the skinwalkers were probably using advanced, at least the Navajo skinwalker witches were using some sort of advanced psychic functioning in order to actually project images into people's minds of anything they want, really, make themselves look like anything. So one cryptid I would like to bring up, which relates back to the reptilian species, is the creature, the monster of what they call scape or swamp, which was reported by a young teenager whose car had stalled. And the sheriff that was involved in the case verifies that this teenager was on the up and up, that he was telling the truth, that he was scared to death, and he reported seeing a fully upright reptilian humanoid walk out of that swamp. And I often wondered if that's what we were seeing, was what he was describing was a reptilian alien.
Mm.
But that exists in the annals now of crypto lore. You look up the monster of Scape or a swamp, and you might see that area where cryptozoology crosses into ET land, you know.
Well, and there's a whole thing of like reptilians that have been living here indigenously on the planet versus the ones that have come from beyond, come from outside of our world. Because again, it's not black and white. We always want to make things, cluster things together as if it's one thing, but it's like, it's so nuanced, it's so varied. There could be reptilians. I mean, I think there are reptilian beings that are here from, thousands of years ago that live within the earth versus the ones that, have come from above, as it were.
It's quite possible, because the reptilian DNA chain obviously exists within the universe. So it's not like outside the realm of possibility. The reptilians are going to, or that at least that DNA kind of consciousness is present. We don't know how widespread it is. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Our reptile life on this planet came from that same waveform, if you want to look at it at a much more philosophical kind of higher perspective.
Mm-hmm. We are at the top of the hour, Mr. Jack.
We are.
We are. So we didn't get to talk about centaurs, heartbreaking, but I know you've already said that you'd come back on. You'd be back on our show?
Absolutely. Anytime, guys. Sorry that it got cut short today. I ended up double booking what was going to be a family function. So I'm kind of in In the doghouse.
You're in the Dogman house.
Right.
Okay, well, that's not to worry, because then we can come back with you at a later date and follow up and do these deep dives. Were there any last little quick questions that you had, Miss Lynda, from the audience that maybe we can pop in before Jack
I
pops
don't.
off?
I think that we will save anything for the next one and continue the discussion in our Facebook group. So yeah, if you guys have more to share, definitely jump over there and add your stories, your questions there. Maybe we can get some answers. And I look forward to having you back, Jack.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Fabulous. And thank you, everyone, for the great conversations on the side and sharing. I love hearing your stories, so thank you. And Jason, thanks for the great insights and questions as always. I love your sense of humor too. So keep bringing that, man. Keep bringing it.
He's a good coach. So like it.
Yeah.
He's great.
Be sure, cup of coffee for Kat if you can. If you can't, either way,
share it
and
out. Share out the
share us. Check the links below for Jack and more information. And Kat, what's happening next week?
Well, I'll tell you what's happening next week. I was going to say real quick, Jack, do you want to give us your final words from your heart to ours, and then we can pop off and I'll wrap it up. You don't have to worry about ours wrapping up the rest of it.
Only that we're really on the cusp here, guys, of a paradigm shift in paranormal research, where you're going to begin to see everything sort of become known and accepted in ways that weren't previously. And I think all of that is sort of leading us into what I call advanced paranormal theory. And I hope that that is going to actually aid humanity in understanding our future and our reality and our place.
Well said. Thank you so much, Jack. That's awesome. Well, I'll be reaching out to book you again.
Awesome. Sounds good, guys.
All right. Love you, man. We'll talk soon.
All right. Love you too, guys. I'll see you next time.
All right.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye, Jason.
Hey, have a good one.
Audience.
And so next week, we're going to have Jacqueline Smith, not from Charlie's Angels, different Jacqueline Smith, for people of my age range. So Jacqueline Smith is a animal communicator, and she's also, she has a hybrid journey of being an ET hybrid of her own stories and awakening. And so she just seems like a sweet, warm, gentle, wise soul. So we're going to have her on. I'm hoping to have her on for part 1 and part 2 as well, because again, there's this range of information and material she knows. So super excited for that. But yeah, let's talk in our Facebook group. I'll dig up that video, and if I don't post that today, I'll post that tomorrow. What Jack was referring to earlier, the werewolf one, and then there was another one, I think, but I'll dig those up and share those. But it was a great show. It's so rich, it's so good, and I'm just thank you everyone for showing up and being part of it. And that's really all I got to say. Go ahead, Miss Lynda. Yeah.
Oh, well, Rev Ned inspired me. We had a super crypto-fabulistic extraterrestrial locious episode. Thank you.
That's great. Thanks, Rev Ned. All right, with that, we will pop off. We love you all. Thank you so much. Take care. We'll see you next week, and we'll see you in the Facebook chat online. Bye, everyone.
Bye.